This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back to Inside the Paint. Thanks, everybody. Make sure to hit that like button for us. Also, keep dropping your questions, your comments as the show rolls on. So, Ira, I was watching Game 1 the other night, and I was texting with some people at work, and I said, early in that game, I said, man, the Heat are getting whatever looks they want, especially from outside against this Philadelphia defense. This could be a game where Duncan Robinson really goes off if he gets out there and gets some looks. And then the quarter wore on, and we didn't see Duncan. And the second quarter came, and we didn't see Duncan. And the rest of the game rolled on, and we didn't see Duncan. So I want to ask you first, what do you think the reasoning is behind Duncan Robinson perhaps not being a part of the rotation, at least in Game 1, maybe throughout this series? And then what do you think has to happen to change that moving forward?
The first answer would be because this is a meritocracy after all. And when you go scoreless twice in the previous series and have another game with only 3 points, you kind of slide down the rotation a little bit. So that's factor number one. Factor number two, I believe, is a simple matter of numbers. And that it's funny, Eric Spoelstra lashed out. In first round, remember, I don't only use a 9-man rotation. That's just you talking. This is a playoff rotation. That's fine. But you run out of numbers now that Victor Oladipo is in the rotation and in the wing rotation. I think the only way that Duncan Robinson, through what we saw in Game 1, gets in is if Dwayne Dedmon is out. And here's the reason. You know Tyler Hero is going to be your sixth man. If you need another big because their big stays on the court longer or just want to give Bam some rest, you bring in Dwayne Dedmon. He'll get 3 fouls in 38 seconds. He'll go back to the bench, but he'll come in.
That was epic, by the way.
It was. Poor Dwayne. I felt really bad. He's a really good guy. I felt really bad for him.
By the way, I want to go talk about the officiating after this, but go ahead.
But Dwayne is the nicest guy. He brings his little son out there. He dunks the ball with him. He holds him up to the rim. People cheer if you come out early to the arena. Good dude. So you have that. The Heat now also, when you look at how they're playing, so you have Tyler, you have Dwayne, Victor Oladipo, meritocracy, earned his way into the rotation after what he did the final 2 games of the first round. So he's in there. Here's the other factor, though. Now you have to play Caleb Martin, who's been very uneven with his offense for this reason. You need a second person to 94 feet hound James Harden. PJ Tucker at 36 years old, just posted a story at sunsentinel.com about him. Talk about that later. And his hustle, it's only going to go so far. So you're going to have to play Caleb Martin. I've already given you 9 names. So it's a question whether you even go 10 deep. But here's the rub. When you look at the rotation going forward, like we said in our first segment here on the Slomin's Home Shield Inside the Paint show, when you look at the Heat rotation Friday, if Kyle Lowry plays, that pushes Gabe Vincent down a rung. I think, Clay, you and I would both agree, Clay Ferraro and Ira Winderman would both agree that Gabe Vincent deserves to stay somehow in the rotation when Kyle comes back. So all of a sudden, Duncan wouldn't even be a 10th man. He'd be an 11th man. It's simply a matter of numbers. All of that said, I'm going to throw it back at you, probably direction you weren't sort of prepared for. By the way, we should get Slomin's Home Security things for the bottom of our coffee cups since we're on at 9 in the morning anyway. So that we can get more money out of this.
That's a great idea. I like that.
So I'm still concerned about Victor Oladipo in the second unit when Jimmy Butler comes back in the game. There was talk before Game 1. We asked at practice the other day, and we asked Tyler about it. Can you play with Victor? And Tyler said, of course I can. I'll make it work. He mentioned that yesterday to us also. The difference is Tyler's a three-point shooter. So when he's out there with Vic, if Vic is driving, if Vic is holding the ball, Tyler can space out and hit the threes. Jimmy Butler, I know he's hit some threes in these playoffs. He's not a floor spacer. He's not by nature a three-point shooter. I still find those minutes uneven. When Jimmy rotates back in the rotation, I do think Clay Ferraro, the Heat, by the way, this is a third-person Wednesday, I do believe, Clay Ferraro, that the Heat would be better with Duncan Robinson alongside Jimmy Butler than Victor Oladipo. So when you're asking me sort of where can I wedge in Duncan Robinson, I think it might be in those minutes. Tyler comes in, Victor Oladipo comes in, but when Jimmy comes back, maybe you try to slide Duncan in there. But again, the math and the calculus gets awfully hard when you're going 10, let alone 11 deep.
Well, and for people who weren't following this a few weeks ago, remember when the Heat made those changes to the lineup and the rotation, and then Max Strus was starting, the reasoning behind it was because they wanted to kind of stagger the minutes with the shooters out there to where Jimmy Butler was always surrounded by shooters. And it worked. And obviously,
and Jimmy gushed about that. Jimmy gushed about the new space. Yes.
To me, the issue for the Heat with playing Duncan Robinson is it gives you one more guy that the other team can attack. And to me, it's that simple. And you saw it the other night, by the way. And we can talk as much as we want about how, look, it makes them better offensively. It helps the spacing. How many times in that second quarter in particular did the Sixers come down the floor and just have the ball in the hands of either Harden or Maxey, or Tobias Harris was the one that was doing it the most out of any of them. And he just kept taking screens from his teammates until Tyler Hero was guarding him.
Yes.
And if you've got Duncan Robinson out there in the floor, in particular with Tobias Harris out there, when you're talking about, I mean, we could talk positionless all we want, but if you have a small forward out there, and Duncan's natural position in many ways is small forward, and Tobias Harris is coming down the floor, you could start with PJ Tucker on him. You could start with Jimmy Butler on him, but the way the Heat play defense, you're going to have this constant switching, and teams know that. And they're just going to set 3 or 4 different screens until they get the matchup that they want. With Hero out there, it's one thing, and we saw just how good he can be in game 1 with the ball in his hands. He was the difference maker on the offensive end of the floor. With Duncan Robinson, he has an elite skill when he's on. The problem is, number 1, when he's off, and number 2, he can't do it by himself. He's not going to create his own shot on the offensive end of the floor, which is what you need come playoff time. So for anybody asking the question, to me, it's as simple as this. You can't have multiple people on the floor against this Philadelphia team who is not going to get their offense from inside. Correct. Unless it's on a drive. You can't have multiple guys on this team on the floor that Philadelphia can attack. And you certainly can't do it if that player can't get his own shot. And so I think there's going to be a place for Duncan at some point as these playoffs wear on. They're going to need him to come out and provide that spacing. But when you're going up against a team like Philadelphia, who's going to do so much ISO stuff, especially with Embiid out, in hindsight, we should have seen it coming, but it just makes sense to make sure that you don't have your worst defender on the floor so the other team can have a really good player isolation.
No, I guess we can sort of coin that the Heat's defenseless squared lineup if they go in that direction with both of them. Maybe, though, my answer to that would be maybe that's when you go zone. Because maybe if Philadelphia can't get the three-pointers, if George Niang is missing, if Furkan Korkmaz comes in and is not making shots, it's Danny Green or bust. So maybe you can pull it off that way, go zone when Jimmy comes back in, cycle back in with Duncan. Again, the Heat's defense was fine last game. You keep Philadelphia to that kind of total, you're going to win every playoff game. The offense was uneven. They got the turnovers down after the first half. That was important. The shooting percentage was never great. Their three-point shooting wasn't great either. So I think sort of Eric Spoelstra has to weigh both of those factors there as well. And also it could be a factor of if Max Strus is off, then Duncan just gets some of the minutes that Max Strus got when he cycled through the rotation also. Look, there's still going to be one more game, I believe, in these playoffs, if they're extended, where Duncan has his 4, 5, 6 three-pointers, because that's what he will do for you. What this does is, and again, I tell people when I write Ask Ira at sunsentinel.com, let's worry about the future for the future. But Clay, you and I both know what's at stake here. We both know that Duncan Robinson is just starting this season a 5-year, $90 million contract. We know the money's going to get tight. We know Tyler Hero's due an extension. We know there might be at least a chance of Victor Oladipo coming back. So I think you're also possibly saying, matter of fact, yes or no, are we seeing the final months of Duncan Robinson, the final weeks of Duncan Robinson as a member of the Miami Heat, Clay Ferraro?
If the Heat have their way, yes. I just wonder how much he's been devalued by what we've seen. And look, his skill is still elite. And when he's on, he's great. I wonder at this point, if you got the Miami Heat, a team with the reputation of like, man, we find ways to put guys on the floor and put them in positions for success. If the Heat are then telling you, as they are by their actions as this series goes on, we can't find a place for him on the floor in the most meaningful spots, in the most meaningful games, who's gonna take that chance? And maybe it is a team that feels like, all right, we need a shakeup. But I long answer to a short question. My answer would be yes, if they can find a trade partner.
And again, you can sweeten the trade with your number 27 draft choice, which is tradable this year also. Maybe with one of your bid players on a minimum deal that someone else covets also, and do it that way. So it's kind of weird. Duncan Robinson, on one hand, is in a prove-it moment, and on the other hand, might not have the chance to prove it and sort of caught in the middle. But you know what? That's the depth of talent question. I mean, you have a Heat bench right now where Tyler Hero single-handedly outscored Philadelphia's bench in the last game. You're seeing the depth of talent. Well, there's a price to pay for that also. If I'm looking at this Heat roster right now, I'm probably saying to myself, Duncan Robinson, quite possibly not back. I believe Dwayne Dedmon, through no fault of his own, not back, because I think you have to start the Omar Yurtseven clock. Hell, he came in and outscored James Harden in the second half last game.
That's right.
So you at least have to take a look at that. So it's kind of interesting to see that you're also a team that's transitioning while you're trying to win, which honestly is the best of all worlds. That you can have young talent that you know is in the pipeline. You can save yourself some salary cap money. And the biggest question to all of that, and I know I got tangential here because I want to totally screw up your show sheet, but the biggest question that I have right now going forward is this. So again, I'll just throw crap at you and then I'll sit back and smile as making you think at the last minute of stuff.
I know where you're going with this, by the way. I know where you're going.
Well, do you? Victor Oladipo?
Victor Oladipo.
Is Victor Oladipo part of the Miami Heat's future?
Nope.
That was pretty good on your feet there, Clay.
Because I thought about this and I was actually scrolling through Twitter, which, by the way, is a dangerous thing to do these days. But somebody made a comment that, hey, man, Tyler Hero, he's playing so well, he's going to be in the starting lineup next season. And somebody made the comment, all right, Victor Oladipo, sixth man of the year. Nope. Because Victor Oladipo, based on what he's shown in these playoffs, he has earned himself a bigger contract than the Miami Heat are going to be able to give him. And look,
I'm going to interrupt you there for a second. The Miami Heat can give him all the money in the world. The Miami Heat have bird rights for Victor Oladipo. The Miami Heat, under NBA rules, can offer Victor Oladipo a contract that starts next season at $40 million. The Heat can do that. Of course, there's luxury tax, there's long-term concerns and all that. So the Heat can. The Heat can't, within any sensible salary base, wind up doing that. They have the wherewithal, but they won't, because he turned 30 today, by the way. This is Victor Oladipo's birthday. So when you look at his age and where he stands, and also I think Victor wants to lead his own team again. Victor Oladipo, I'm going to put it on you again here, Clay. Screw the show sheet. Victor Oladipo, if he comes back for the Miami Heat, would be where on the overall team hierarchy? In other words, in Indiana, he was the number one guy for a really long time. What's the best? The best, if Victor Oladipo shows out, was like he was in Game 4 against Atlanta, like he was in Game 5 against Atlanta. What's the best numerologically when you list the Heat's players next season's roster? Where would he fit in?
Very easy, fifth. And that's best case scenario. Behind Jimmy, Bam, Tyler, Kyle.
Okay. So you're only paying your number 5 option so much. And this is part of it also. And again, this is a salary cap league. So it's easier for the Heat, for Nick Harrison, for Mickey Harrison to justify also. You have to slot players based on where they are in your hierarchy, or you'll go friggin' broke. That might have been the Duncan Robinson mistake, because 5 years, 90. Matter of fact, okay, I love this game here because I don't have to think. Wednesday Clay does. Right now, Duncan Robinson, Heat hierarchy, this team going forward. So you're going to shave some names. Where does he fall number-wise?
I mean, look, I think, unfortunately, they're giving you that answer, unfortunately, for Duncan. And look, I think, I mean, if you're telling me offensively and what he brings, and obviously there's still an elite skill set there. But, man, Ira, the defense is bad. It's bad. And look, I know he's worked really hard on it. So, I mean, if you're asking me to throw out a number, I mean, 8th, 9th, 10th, I mean, if that, and that's when he's on.
So you have one sort of mispaid player there. With Victor, you'd have another. Here's one more I'm going to throw at you. Caleb Martin's had a wonderful season. Caleb Martin has a unique value for the Heat. And yet, if we were to go through next season's Heat roster, Caleb Martin would probably come in maybe 7th or 8th man. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. Probably wouldn't start. Probably you'd have one wing ahead of him, reserve, maybe even Yurtseven if he gets a chance. And even Caleb Martin, you can offer up to, it's a weird sort of scale. He's a early bird free agent. The Heat, he's a restricted free agent. The Heat can match outside offers up to their limitations. The Heat's limitation would be about a 4-year, $44 million contract. Do you want to get in the Tyler Johnson situation again, where you're talking about a ninth man? Remember, Tyler was 4 years, $50 million. And at the end, I know it was backloaded, that contract, and it made it more difficult. So you have those decisions also. So I'm bringing this full circle for this reason. I wasn't planning to get tangential, but hey, that's what Wednesday mornings are here for on the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint. This Heat team will not look the same after this season. Live in the moment. Enjoy the moment. Worry about Duncan Robinson and Caleb Martin and Victor Oladipo in the future. It's all about now. So this takes us full circle to where we started this segment. So when you're asking me, should Duncan Robinson be in the rotation? Should Victor Oladipo get more minutes? It's all about now. It's all about getting those remaining 11 wins you need to get an NBA championship. You have 5 of them down. You still have more to go.
And Carlos makes the comment, Duncan just didn't step up here in his contract and then it didn't play to it. I think the thing with Duncan, he's no different of a player than the player that they gave a lot of money to. Now, he did go through some struggles early in the season. I still believe, because he's not the only one who was asked about this, I still believe the new basketball caused some issues. It was a transition. Paul George went through it, mentioned it, CJ McCollum. I mean, a lot of really good shooters talked about but unfortunately, he's never been a good defender. Unfortunately, he's always been the one that officials have their eye on when there's contact, and he just seems to get the at some point when you're talking about playoff basketball and when you're talking about the type of depth that Miami has, and you know that defensive stops are the most important thing in the league when it gets down to the postseason, and you have a guy that can't help you get one, and you have a bunch of other guys who can, it's that simple. And so I think, unfortunately for Duncan, it's not that like he stopped doing what made him good. He's had some issues, obviously, like everybody goes through. It's just that the Heat had better options. It's a great problem to have, and it's what's going to make this team potentially a championship.
And on the way out of the segment, my thought is everything changed around Duncan Robinson. I think Duncan Robinson stayed who Duncan was, but then Kyle Lowry came in. Then Bam took a little bit more of an offensive bent. Then Max Strus stepped up, to use Eric Spoelstra's word, 10x, and became that much better of a player. Then Victor Oladipo got back into the mix in late March and took a spot. So I don't think Duncan has changed. I think Duncan very much is the same as who he was. The roster evolved. That's why this season, instead of being a number 6 seed, the Heat are a number 1 seed because of everything else they did in the offseason, because of the evolution of the season. So sometimes, you know the phrase, if you're staying in place, sometimes you fall behind. I think that's what happened to Duncan Robinson. He was, and I believe this, he was, is, and always will be basically the same player. I know Eric Spoelstra says we can't put people in boxes, but Duncan Robinson is in a box. Great three-point shooter. Can be electric, can change games. Eric Spoelstra's word, ignitable for periods of time. But that's who he is at his 5-year, $90 million contract. And you know what, Clay? The train left the station and everyone else moved forward and Duncan stayed in place. So I don't think any of this is on Duncan. He is who he is. He's the same Duncan Robinson. His team got better. His team got to championship level.
Coming up next, let's spin this thing forward and talk about what may happen tonight. And I also want to talk about the worst officiating in an NBA playoff game I have ever seen. That was awful in game 1. I'm going to run through the break right here. You guys send me out because we're going to talk about that a lot more right here on Inside the Paint.